Welcome everyone to the December webinar for UK PACT Parents and Carers Together. This week and this month, we are delighted to be talking about the topic of breastfeeding at work, something that is very important within our sector and within our country as a whole. We have an expert on the call and I'll be introducing Ernestine in a moment. Really delighted to have you all here today. This is the last one of 2024, and we really have been delighted with the engagement we've had so far. We've got lots of contributions to start working through and thinking about for what UK PACT is going to become. As per last time, just wanted to use an opportunity to just remind anyone on the call who's not already been aware of this, that we are in the process of building a website, which will be kind of the central hub for our organisation, UK PACT. At present, there is a landing page. So the website is www.ukpact.org. And you can see this is the page you'd go to. There is material that you can link to. So we have a YouTube page with some videos and including some of the recent webinar sessions. We have a LinkedIn group, which is still in its early stages, but that might become a space where we can discuss topics. And then importantly, we also have a toolkit, which is currently on a Google Doc, which you can request edit access to if you would like, so you can add things to it. And the long-term vision for that is for the toolkit to be embedded within the website so that you can click into different sections. Some of the planned activity we've been thinking about for the website include some kind of benchmarking document or league table where we can show the provision of maternity leave, paternity leave, shared parental leave, and topical for today, breastfeeding provision like breastfeeding rooms, and also provision around things like pregnancy loss and carers leave and carers checklist. So what within the higher education institution is offered. So we're thinking about having that as well on the website. But as I said, still under construction at the moment, but we're hoping this will be coming in the coming months. Okay, I'm going to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Ernestine Dheyoh Ndzi. I apologize, Ernestine, your middle name, I may not have pronounced that correctly, but Ernestine is an associate professor at York St John in the field in law, but I know Ernestine as a trailblazer in the field of parenting research, an activist, and someone who has led the way in bringing people together on the topic of parenting at work. Ernestine has organised local events, national events. She organises a conference which is hosted at York St John, and to hear her speak, you can immediately get a sense of the passion she has behind what she does. So I'm really thrilled to be able to welcome Ernestine to our webinar today, and just look forward to hearing what she is going to share with you. And once you've heard Ernestine's work, we'd like to open the floor for some discussion about this topic of breastfeeding, particularly in UK higher education. Okay, I'm going to stop my sharing, and hopefully Ernestine on the call can then share slides. Ernestine, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mac. And I'm really delighted to be here. Thanks for the invite. You're doing an amazing work. I've been listening to all what you were saying about me. I'm thinking, are you actually talking like somebody else or me? But the key thing is this is definitely an area that I am super, super interested in. And a lot of people do always ask me, you are law, how did you get into breastfeeding? How did you get into this area? I said, well, law can be anywhere. So it's a real pleasure to meet all of you. I know that Mark has told me I've got 30 minutes and I'm going to try and stay within that timeline, but because I know that this is a topic I can talk forever on, but I'll try to keep it short and sweet. So I'm going to talk to you about research that I conducted looking at UK higher education. So I was looking at all the universities. And the study was really looking at shared parental leave practices, shared parental leave and breastfeeding practices in UK higher education. What I'm going to be, the findings I'll be sharing with you will only have to do with breastfeeding. I've left the shared parental leave aspect of it out. And one of the key questions I hear a lot was, why did you choose higher education? Why didn't you just do a study? Now, I choose higher education because I work in higher education. I know the work that we do. I know we do a lot of research, groundbreaking work that changes policy, changes a lot of practices. So I wanted to start from home, if that's a thing. I said, I want to know how higher education, how we support parents, what parents' experiences, particularly mothers who are breastfeeding and return to work, what their experiences are. So that got me then to start the work. And like I said, the data was collected for both shared parental leave and breastfeeding. So I decided to not go to universities, but I decided to go on the university website. So everything that is publicly available to anybody from universities that had to do with breastfeeding. That's what I was looking for. And partly because I was looking at it that we already know a lot of parents, a lot of the culture is changing. People are gravitating towards more family-friendly employers, and employers are using that as a big thing. So I gravitated towards that point to look at universities that have got anything on their websites that's talking about shared parental leave. And then also I did semi-structured interviews with mothers that are working in different universities. Now, I have to highlight that this data was collected during COVID time. So there is a COVID twist to it, which actually, coincidentally, really worked well because it gave a different dimension to the whole topic as a whole. So, well, can't find my cursor. Mark, I can't see anybody. So if there's anything, please do let me know because I can't see anybody at the moment. So
You're coming through loud and clear, so no, it's all good.
Thank you. Thank you. So out of the 125 universities, because we were using the university guide, out of the 125 universities, we went through all the websites, Googling, looking, using all search words. We only found 35 universities that had any kind of mention on breastfeeding on their website. So either it had to do with a whole breastfeeding policy, or it had to do with just a string of sentence mentioning somewhere that breastfeeding is legal, it's okay, you can do it here. So we found 35 universities. What you will see on this chart here on the right is where the information was hosted. It starts from brief mentions, and these mentions could be on, maybe they were writing about something and the word breastfeeding came along and they just put it there, but it didn't actually anchor to anything seriously that gives more information about breastfeeding. There were information around nursing rooms for university that had progressed a little bit more in this area and were more supportive to breastfeeding mothers. And it could have been under family-friendly rights support. There's just information everywhere, right down to a whole policy on breastfeeding. Now you will see that policy documents that embedded information around breastfeeding. We had 9 universities out of the 35, and people that had something to do with breastfeeding more from an EDI agenda. We had 7 universities, and the rest, it was just scattered everywhere. Now, that alone started to kind of ask the question about breastfeeding. Why is it so? Why is it that it's all over the place? Why is it that universities, which I was naive, I agree, but Why is it that universities that I expect that will be championing support and given all the benefits or health benefits around breastfeeding, given also the employers' benefits of having mothers who are satisfied coming or employee satisfaction and mothers coming back to work early after maternity leave and so on, I started to ask a lot of questions on like, why is it that I'm seeing the information more like this? I'm squeezing my face because my cursor is gone again. But what we found was, in terms of the universities, we like to put this out and just say congratulations and blow the trumpet for universities that were kind of leading. So University College London, we found that the university just didn't have information, but the information also demonstrated that they had across their campus 32 combined rooms for breastfeeding. Now, it ranged from having separate breastfeeding rooms to combined rooms. In some cases is combined with prayer rooms, some cases combined with first aid rooms, but across the campus they had up to 32 combined rooms. Now that was really good, and they had 6 dedicated breastfeeding rooms. That says a lot about the support they are putting in place for breastfeeding mothers. Second by University of Arts, London had 15 rooms. But apart from these 2 universities, it was more kind of on average across the 35 universities, they had on average about 2 rooms per campus. Now, these 2 rooms is not 2 dedicated breastfeeding rooms. It could be combined room with, in most cases, was combined room with first aid room. Now, that's an issue in itself that we can talk about. In terms of accessibility and storage, because what's the point if you have a breastfeeding room, yet you can't have access to the room, or you don't have the facilities that you need in the room to be able to store or even express. So we found 15 universities provided a combination of facilities for mothers to store breast milk. So it ranged from people having tabletop fridges where they will store their milk in there, or they have a fridge in the breastfeeding room where they can actually store their express breast milk in there. 13 universities required prior booking in advance, and in most cases, it was always because they had a lot of combined rooms that were being used in conjunction with first aid. And obviously, it meant you need to request a room because you don't know when it might be needed. And in most cases, it was just one first aid room on campus, or on average 2 across the whole campus. So it meant that they have to sort of, it came across like they need to monitor who is using the room. And given that it's first aid room, you can start to think about emergencies. So you need to know whether the room is available or not. Whilst we were doing this study, we found that some universities, in terms of terminology, they had something on the website, but in terms of terminology, it was not very friendly. University of Glasgow had information was talking about you can express breast milk in this room, but you cannot breastfeed in this room. I am glad to say that we wrote to University of Glasgow after a few exchanges. They changed the terminology on the website. There was another university I'm not going to name, which outrightly said you can breastfeed in the toilet. So when it got to the point of writing to them, they had pulled it down, but they've not put anything else in terms of where you can breastfeed. So they've just taken it down and left it like that. So we then decided that, okay, this is now really interesting. The picture is showing that there are some universities that are engaging with supporting breastfeeding mothers returning to work, and there are other universities who are not really supporting, or they're just not doing anything. So we wanted to find out from mothers who are breastfeeding and have returned to work or planning to return to work to see what their experiences were. So there was a lot that came out of the interview. I've not done any interview. I've had too much that I don't know what to do with the data, but forgive me because the slides, there's a lot of quotes that I will be putting on, but I'm not going to be reading through all of them, but I'll be explaining the points behind them. So the first thing was all about pre-pregnancy awareness of breastfeeding policies. What a lot of the mothers, 90% of the mothers said that there was no discussion. They didn't know that there's any kind of breastfeeding policy or support that is available in the workplace. And for them, because of, unfortunately, the culture in the UK, it doesn't make breastfeeding an obvious thing. It doesn't make breastfeeding as something that is just standard. It's just there. So people become a little bit nervous around even asking questions around breastfeeding or asking for breastfeeding support. Or even when they're talking about going on maternity leave, and they're discussing when you will go, when you will come back, people just don't feel comfortable asking about maybe what kind of support could be in place if they are breastfeeding on return to work. So people were saying that they had no awareness. Well, there were some workplaces that had a breastfeeding policy, and some people said, well, although now I realized there was a breastfeeding policy, I did not know. Somebody else told me that there was a policy. Now, in terms of lack of institutional policy, it was the majority of the women talked about their university not having any kind of policy or any kind of statement on their family-friendly hub or on their intranet about breastfeeding at all. Yes, there was information about maternity leave, paternity leave, all the other things, but there was nothing on checked parental leave. Now, I think this is where universities is missing something as well, because a lot of colleagues, I'll call it colleagues, a lot of colleagues in higher education, we're all educated, we know where the internet is, we very quickly want to go there and find out something before we ask somebody. A lot of people talked about trolling the internet and finding nothing on breastfeeding. Now, when we ask questions around location, accessibility, and type of rooms, it was quite interesting. There was a myriad of experiences that we got from parents under this. Now, location. So like I said at the very beginning, in terms of the number of rooms that universities had, it's kind of on average like 2. Now, it depends on the size of the university or the size of the campus. It depends whether the campus is very big and you need to walk for a long time to get from point A to point B. Some of the mothers talked about how difficult it was to get from where they were kind of based as an office or where they were working to where the actual breastfeeding room, in most cases that was combined with first aid room, where it was. They talked about the number of times that they actually have to go and express and the impact on their work and the impact on them as well. Some of them talked about, particularly with the first aid rooms are predominantly set up for emergencies, for first aid. So most of them expressed the fact that when you think about first aid, you think about maybe somebody dying, blood gushing somewhere, and that's what they need to do. And they set the first aid rooms in that nature. But yet they ask breastfeeding mothers to go and use it. So when they go in there, it is not comfortable. Some don't have comfortable seats. There are no sockets. There's no fridge. And in some cases where there's fridge, the fridge is meant to store first aid things. It's not meant to store express breast milk. That became a big problem. Some of them explained the fact that the rooms were quite dark, and in some cases there is no window, and it's just not a comfortable place to express breast milk. There is a very different kind of mindset when you're dealing with a first aid and when you're dealing with something like expressing breast milk, because that's food, but you are sat in an environment that is ideally designed and set up for things like blood gushing everywhere, not very pretty kind of environment. So these were some of the key points that were coming up from mothers. In some instances, some of them had rooms that were lockable. You go in there and you lock the room. In some instances, the rooms didn't even have a lock. And mothers were talking about that feeling that you could just be sat there with both of your breasts out and you're expressing, and somebody might just barge in through the door, maybe needing emergency first aid. What do you do in those instances? And it was it was really uncomfortable, as the mothers explained. Now, we have an interesting quote here from another mother who was talking about how there wasn't enough support, but they had a line manager who was very supportive. I think what is key here is the fact that you can see from the quote that the line manager was saying, you don't ever feel like you need to pump in the toilet. I mean, that already says a lot, that that's actually what goes on. And he is trying to tell this mother that don't feel like you have to do that. The HR person was saying, there is the first aid room. And you can see how much difference a line manager's support can make to a mother, even where the institution hasn't put the right resources and support in place for the mother. In this instance, the line manager will say, you can don't feel like you can do that. You can use my office and lock the door. So this is a line manager who acknowledges that the toilet is not the right place. The first aid room is not the right place, and saying to the mother, you can use my office. So we are seeing that there is, apart from the cultural, apart from the workplace culture in itself, from an institutional standpoint, not being designed in a way that is supporting breastfeeding mothers returning to work, there is still a lot that line managers or colleagues can do, but also we need to acknowledge that it depends whether they have the resources. Yes, the line manager said you could use my office, right? She can use the office, but when she expressed the breast milk, where will she keep it? Which was one of the problems that the mothers brought up. Because there were no dedicated fridges for express breast milk, some of them were putting it in the communal fridge that everybody was putting their food in. Some of them would return to see a note where someone has taken out their milk and stuck a note on it saying, get this rubbish out of here. Now you can imagine how disheartening that is to a mother who is trying to preserve the milk to take it back to their babies later. Now, one of the things we found which was really interesting from one of the interviewees was that she said this quote came particularly from a mom that had two children. The first time had the baby and didn't feel very supported. And the second time, the university had been going through the application for Athena Swan. So as a result of the work that they were doing around Athena Swan, she was part of the work, and then she made her views known. And as a result, they put some measures in place to support breastfeeding mothers. While this mother was very, very happy that finally the university put that in, she was saying, did it have to take them that much? Can they just not think about mothers, women who are breastfeeding? It's natural. It's not like it's an artificial thing. It's natural. Why can't they think about that in terms of supporting mothers? Now, also, as a result of the nature of the support available to mothers in the workplace, it impacted on mothers' decision as to when they want to stop breastfeeding or as to how long they want to continue breastfeeding. Now, more than 50% of the mothers that we interviewed went back to work after 9 months. They were looking at the first 6 months as critical, saying, oh, we're following the WHO recommendation, exclusively breastfeed for 6 months. And then I took a little bit of time to just breastfeed for a little longer, whilst also weaning my child, because I know when I go back to work, there is just no provision to enable me to continue breastfeeding. So yes, while the WHO talks about exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, it talks about you can continue breastfeeding for up to 2 years and above. If you can, it still has a lot of benefits. But what we're saying is mothers who could try to breastfeed for 6 months and then return to work, or use a few more months to just wean the baby before they return to work, because they are thinking about the practicalities of having to express breast milk or sustain breastfeeding when they return to work. Now, this is an area where if it is not just about expressing the breast milk and bringing back to the baby, it is also where we need to think about the physiology of the mother, because when the breast is too full, it can become really painful. It can develop into mastitis. It can develop into all sorts of things. So it's not just about expressing the breast milk to take back to the baby, but it has a lot to do with the mother as well. And this is also where, as universities, I think we need to be thinking even more critically, because there's a lot of research that is demonstrating that mothers who stop breastfeeding before they are ready and willing to stop breastfeeding, they experience mental health and depression. Now, this is causing health impact on the mothers. And what employers are not appreciating is that where you have a mother who is unwell because of stopping breastfeeding before they wanted to, you don't have that mother back. But the mother is at home now on sick leave rather than actually looking after the baby. And also, there's a lot of benefits around breastfeeding. So where you have a mother who is breastfeeding, but yet she's unable to express the milk and take back, the baby might be crying because maybe she's expressing in the toilet and she's pouring it out in the toilet, and it depends. She might not want to have introduced formula at that particular point, but yet she's introducing it because she thinks, although I can express in the toilet, which I don't want to, but I don't want to carry something from the toilet back to the house. So it's more about thinking carefully about how we, on a health equality perspective as well as in the workplace scenario. Now, like I said at the very beginning, the data for this study was collected during COVID. Now, COVID gave a different spin to it because a lot of the mothers that I talked to were still breastfeeding. At that point, there were some mothers who were saying, I was contemplating going back to work 10 months ago, but because of lockdown, because of COVID, I'm still at home and I am still breastfeeding, and I'm still breastfeeding on demand. And that's one of the things, because mothers who would like to breastfeed on demand, when they return to work, they are unable to breastfeed on demand, but they will need to be expressing so often, because if they don't express, that's another way of keeping the milk flowing. They need to constantly express. So the mothers were saying that actually COVID was really terrible for a lot of people, but COVID gave them the opportunity to carry on breastfeeding without thinking about facilities, without thinking about how am I going to do this? Where will I store the milk? When do I come home? Where's my baby? They said they didn't have to think anything about that. Yes, they were working from home, and they said they were able to work from home efficiently and still breastfeed their babies the way they wanted. So the mother we have here said, well, I am still breastfeeding. So something that she could have stopped had it been she went back to work. Other mothers said, well, I started contemplating about what I am really going to do, but I don't have to do that now. I don't have to go through the torture of putting my place in a position where I have to almost choose between feeding my baby and going back to work. And that was particularly even more difficult for mothers who were not financially, as a household, were not doing very well, because they're thinking about going back to work early after from maternity leave because of financial reasons. But that means something like breastfeeding needs to go because the workplace isn't supporting them. So that was putting mothers in a very, very difficult position, having to decide what to do, having to choose one over the other. The other interesting point that came up, which I thought I should talk about, was support from tiredness from breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is tiring. Mother said breastfeeding is tiring. Same as when you go and you sit there and you express. So that is this energy being drained out of you, which a lot of people do not acknowledge. And they were talking about the lack of the managers just actually being empathetic towards that was one of the key things. And just expecting that you've come back to work, you're fine, get on with it, just do your work. That was one of the key things as well. Now, this is not just one factor that builds into that tiredness, but having a baby, there's a lot of different factors that builds into it that naturally makes you tired. But we're talking about if line managers could just be aware and be more supportive, that would have been great as well. One of the points that came up, which I haven't included in this, was about mothers who were breastfeeding who had like funding, research funding, and had PhD students. And they talked a lot about the lack of support and having to come back to work because they didn't want their research project to fail, or they didn't want their PhD students to be left hanging. But as a result, they still had to come back to work early and they had to stop breastfeeding. Something that they thought could have been easily accommodated by the institution. Now, just on to kind of the last points, really, it was about timing. So one of the questions I asked was, so what is the perfect time for you, for an employer to tell you about any support that they have in place for you? Whilst a lot of them said employers should just have the policies there for everyone, say, this is a breastfeeding friendly institution. Here are the breastfeeding rooms, and signpost it, because a lot of it is that a lot of the universities, even where they have breastfeeding rooms, they don't signpost it. They will signpost a first aid room. They will not signpost a breastfeeding room. Almost passing that, almost that perception that it's a shame, it's a taboo around breastfeeding, but that needs to change. But mothers were saying that when they start telling employers when they're 15 weeks pregnant, or they have to go, and they start telling employers at that point that they will be going off, they need to be giving them the essential information, because that information will help them make their decisions around when they are going to return from work after return to work after their leave. Now, there was a lot that mothers talked about. And like I said, I could talk about this forever, but I was conscious I've only got 30 minutes. But what does that really mean? In many ways, I started to look at this and say, well, somebody mentioned Athena Swan. And actually, Athena Swan could really be helping with this. And I had an assessment, I had a workshop with the Athena Swan Charter, and I was saying, why can't you embed breastfeeding as part of your key elements of assessment? That will mean many universities will start to think about it. Now, Athena Swan Awards is not about making universities do something, but they are all recommendations, and they have to show how they're trying to balance this to help. But that's one of the key things, given that we don't have a national policy that kind of forces employers to put resources in place. We have the health and safety regulatory or executive health and safety regulation, which talks about if a mother is breastfeeding, assess. But all this assessment really is applicable to areas where you're dealing with maybe some hazardous substances and so on. But if you think about other departments that don't really do much about it, what kind of risk assessment? And a lot of the mothers talked about the fact that even when they were pregnant, there wasn't a risk assessment, let alone trying to do a risk assessment around breastfeeding. Now, that health and safety regulation does not make it mandatory for employers to think about the resources that the mothers will need, like have a comfortable room, have socket, have fridge, have that. It is not there. And what about where the resources are located? How can a mother get there? How does it impact on their time? Is that time being paid? Is it not being paid? How is their work kind of during the day? How is their work pattern like? Does it enable them to do that? Timing of the information. Employers should be thinking about the timings when they give information to employees around breastfeeding. And the big thing is around flexibility. Now, flexible working, we've heard all about it and what the government is doing about it. But flexible working and flexibility should really encapsulate breastfeeding, because people's needs are very different. Line managers need to be more helpful. And where there are resources be able to signpost. But we have seen, as an example, one of the examples we saw, where line managers, where the workplace don't really have anything, there's still much line managers can do. Line managers can also start to feed back to the institution and say, I've got a member of staff who is doing the adult, know how to support them. We need to support them. So it's like building allies, and line managers can be good allies for mothers as well. Now, one of the last things I was recommending in terms of institutions is, whilst there is no national policy on breastfeeding, we don't need to wait for the government to make something before we actually do what is right. That is my opinion. So I thought something like maternity leave, if you have a maternity leave policy, you should just link it to something on breastfeeding. Ideally have a breastfeeding policy. Make sure that your maternity leave policy links to breastfeeding. Now, this structure that I have here, because like I said, the study was around shared parental leave and breastfeeding practices in higher education. And this was all about showing how policies are supposed to be linked up in a way that mothers can easily find it. Because some of the institutions that already had a policy, some of the mothers were still struggling because they said, well, I didn't see anything. It's until somebody told me that there was a policy there. But that mother had been on maternity leave, was given a maternity leave policy. Had it been the maternity leave policy was linked to the breastfeeding policy, she would have known, because reading the maternity leave policy, she would have picked that up from there. So it is important that we become more smarter in how we support our employees, our staff, and our mothers. And it's not a one-ended, it's not a one-sided benefit. It's a two-way benefit, because the mother is doing what she decides she would like to do in terms of how she feeds a baby, but also the employer will be having a happy employee back at work, an employee that is highly productive, because also if you're at work and you're worrying that actually I've got a swollen breast here, I should be either expressing somewhere or I should be feeding my baby, you will not really be productive at work either. So there is a lot that I could go on talking about within this research, but the key point is actually that the universities need to be doing a lot more. At least they should be trailblazers in this area. So I'm going to stop there because I think I've gone way over my 30 minutes, like I always do, and I apologize for that.
Thank you so much, Ernestine. I wanted to give you the full presentation time because it's important. The points you made at the end are particularly important, and I really appreciate you sharing those points. I know we've got people on the call who are really passionate about this. Would anyone like to ask a question of Ernestine or share anything about this topic? I was particularly struck by the importance of embedding within policy, like the linking. I think that is a really important point, and I think it's something that can be a recommendation. And also, I think the line management stuff is really vital. Valerie, please go ahead.
I suppose it's just more a comment in terms of recommendations that given that the WHO guidance is to breastfeed for up to 2 years or beyond, it's not just about that return to work, but longer after the mother has potentially returned, years after, and thinking through implications and expectations for career development. So thinking about academic jobs expectations, that we will travel to go to conferences and things. If you're breastfeeding, unless you can take the child with you. Yeah, so I think it kind of like needs to be acknowledgement of kind of broader implications, maybe in terms of promotion, people's career development, what people are being asked to do, for example, in relation to travel.
Totally agree.
I think that's a very good point, which came up when just one person talked about going to a conference, and she talked about I really wanted to breastfeed and nothing will stop me. And I went to the conference. I took my breast pumps and my cool back and I kept expressing and packing it in there. So I think it is a very good point, because what I learned, which I didn't know because I never expressed, I did breastfeed all my kids, but I never expressed. But what I did not know until I did the study was that people who were breastfeeding said, because as a result of, if you're breastfeeding on demand, if you start to express and you keep to that and you express on demand, you produce a lot of milk. So you can even go for 2 days and your baby will have enough stock, and you carry on expressing and you come back and your baby will still have that. So I think it's not, in terms of talking about breastfeeding, it's not like having a policy, like a one size fits all. There needs to be a lot of flexibility in terms of really understanding the needs of that mother, the mother's job role, day-to-day job role. How will that work? And it's all about just showing that we're going to try our best to support you within reason. I think that's the key point.
Yeah, it kind of struck me from the quote you had with the person who was really kind of acknowledging their line manager. Even in that context, it wasn't that they were offering something remarkable. It was just that they were being a human and showing that they cared. You don't have, please don't use the toilet. No, I'll do what I can. That actually makes a big difference, I think, just to feel that you're not a persona non grata. You actually are welcome, and your needs are, we'll do what we can. That shouldn't be the baseline. There should be a lot better than this. But I think it just struck me that as a line manager, that's what you can do, and really embedding it within some of the conversations that should be happening pre and return. That's how it should be established. Becca, please.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Hi, yes, so it's, I'm not sure why my camera's not working. I've got it on, but anyway.
Good to see you now.
Oh, hello. Yeah, it's not a question, it's just some comments really. First of all, sort of congratulations on conducting the research. It's also an area I'm extremely passionate about. And when I returned to work after my second child back in February 22, I returned, I was also pumping to manage my milk, and she did not want to stop, and I didn't actually stop feeding her for 2.5 years. But I had that, situations that so many returning mothers have, where there was no dedicated space on campus to pump, and it was toilets, it was tears, it was, everyone is fighting that imposter syndrome anyway after a period of maternity leave, the guilt, all of that. The physiological symptoms as well, which you also went into. And actually I thought enough is enough, and I started sort of campaigning, and I was so fortunate to find some fantastic people around me. So Parent and Carers Network, and people in ED&I at our university, and estates as well, who sort of recognized the challenges, and actually this wasn't right. And so since then we've created 2 dedicated spaces on campus, and we will be doing more. So hopefully with more sort of information out there and sort of keeping this on the public agenda, hopefully sort of this will become the norm, I hope, because too many women struggle out there, too many people.
No, I'm really glad to hear that, because sorry, my own university, they didn't have anything until I did this study. I was aware they didn't have anything, so I went to the comms people and said, can you do a press release about this research before I share? And they went, whoa, you need to wait. We need to go to HR because we don't have anything. I said, well, do something then. But now they've done something. And which, again, do we need all of this to acknowledge what is so obvious?
Exactly, I know. I know. I couldn't believe that still in this sort of, day and age that nothing like this had been sort of figured out and recognized. And there's so much to it, there's that you've touched upon, and we could talk for hours and hours and hours about the sort of ripple effects of this. So yeah, hopefully things will start to change, but it's taken too long. So well done.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Thanks, Becca. Becca, what institution are you at, out of interest? I'm just with your campaigning.
University of Portsmouth. So
Portsmouth.
yeah.
Oh, that's my alma mater.
we'll put a pin in that potentially for future discussions.
Yeah, and please feel free to reach out
Thank
to
you.
me as well. Yeah, they're 2 dedicated spaces. They're breastfeeding pods at the moment. Our estate's rapidly changing, so but you know, they are going to be. I have been told that sort of all the new builds are going to have them sort of woven into the blueprints, for example, to have a dedicated room.
Right.
And the pods have a really comfortable chair. And I think my crucial point was that they had to be dedicated, because obviously, like was touched upon earlier, sharing the combined use just doesn't work sometimes, you know.
No, I'm really glad to hear that, Becca. I will follow up with Portsmouth because I presented this research to the Athena Swan group in Portsmouth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
And feel free to reach out to me and whatever I can do to help, or you know, I'd happily help.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Jessie, thank you. Jessie, we have time for your comment and then we'll wrap up because I'm aware that we're at 45 minutes.
Hi, yeah, no, I'll just keep it brief. It's kind of to touch on something about you mentioned before about mental health, and just another area we've not really thought about as well. It's actually the mental load and the pressure and the stress of actually going and having to express. It's often seen that that you're almost being a burden, and it's something they have to go and fit in, or even sometimes there's this perception that you're almost scavenging or going off to have like a bit of a break, and it couldn't be further from the truth. The actual physical toil and demand and mental toil of going and expressing and trying to get a decent yield, and when you don't have the environment to do that and you're trying to get a certain amount, I know from my own personal experiences with my second, he had a real difficult time with weaning off milk and wanted to keep drinking lots of breast milk, and was having a lot in his preschool setting, and that pressure to try and keep expressing and keep enough on top of the guilt. So you felt guilty enough for coming out of work, you feel guilty for coming into work, and then you're going off and then you're not making enough, and you've already got imposter syndrome at work, you feel like a failure because you're not creating enough. It's this whole, how are we supporting people and taking a bit less of a clinical view of it in terms of the fact that it is put in a first aid space and there's still a person at the heart of this, and this is a very natural process, and this is something we should be supporting, and this a bit more of a holistic approach, I suppose, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the mental health side of this project needs to develop a bit more, because like I said, I've never done a study where I think, to be fair, this is the first study where I had a lot of data. The one that I've had overwhelming data is fathers transitioning into fatherhood as well. But it just highlights some things that are just it's so natural yet missed. And I also question the EDI agenda for universities. If we're talking about EDI, inclusivity, but we are missing a whole motherhood and breastfeeding from that. I think we're really, really missing a lot. Thank you for sharing, Jessie.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie. That's really valuable. I've taken some notes there as well, because just to kind of, I'll briefly put another slide back on just to kind of finish up today. But this is an area that, as an organisation, UK PACT, I think we have an opportunity to potentially organise around this as a topic area, and also to benefit from some of the research that Ernestine has already done. So just to highlight where there is good practice and where there is a gap. So we're thinking about having a table of who does what within higher education. I just wanted to briefly highlight to everyone on the call that we have on the theme of, because Ernestine was talking about dad's transitions. So we have Jessica Hobbs, who is a PhD candidate and is at the stage of now analysing her results. So is able to talk to us a bit about her research looking at paternal well-being, and that will be on January 15th, so into 2025. And beyond that, we are in talks with a few different speakers. So for February, I've been in touch with someone who was going to speak to us a bit about carers, and potentially on the theme of, well, it's the kind of sobering theme of palliative care, and that aspect of caring. So we've heard from Carers UK on the theme of carers at work. So this is a different element of carers as well. When we go into 2025, we'll be asking the question of people who are on the call, how should we organise? I did have that as a potential thing to ask you today, but it's been more important to focus on the theme of breastfeeding. So the only thing I want to leave you with is just very Merry Christmas to all of you. And we really look forward to seeing you in 2025. I will stop sharing now so that I can just see people on the call. So it's been a real privilege to start to get to know you all as part of UK PACT and to start this webinar series in 2024. And this is just the beginning. So we're starting to build a sense of who we are. And as we move into 2025, that is the agenda that we'll have. We asked a bit about what's important to us, what do we want from our employers, but we want to start to transition towards who are we as an organisation, so as a national collective of networks, and that work will continue in 2025. Anna, did you have anything you wanted to say before we let everyone go?
Just want to wish everybody a very good rest, a good break, whatever it is you're doing, and thanks for being on this journey with us. It's been really exciting.
Thanks, everyone, and hope you have a nice rest over the break. And take care of yourself, and love to your families.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernestine. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.